All right, well, everybody, welcome. Most of you probably been paying attention to the news, and you know that the subway is coming back. So this morning, we have Laura Osteen is going to talk about her research on the subway plan from the 1980s. And Laura is a native Dallasite who holds degrees in music from Richland College, literature and history from London's Kingston University, and a Master of Arts in Humanities from UT Dallas, where she focused on mid-20th century political history. And in 2012, she was very busy. She completed simultaneous internships at the Sixth Floor Museum and the Dallas Historical Society. She participated in the docent program with the Dallas Center for Architecture. She was a guest curator for a civil rights exhibit with the Dallas Mexican American Historical League. And she also created a website. Her website's called Dallas Filth Raw Histoire. And my French, I think my high school French worked out well there. So her focus is really sharing kind of the little known facts about Dallas history and things that have kind of gone by the wayside. And she really is fascinated by all those stories that we call kind of sleeping stories that she wants to shed some limelight on. She currently works at our institution in our guest services department. And so please welcome Laura Osteen.
Hello, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome. So here I am to talk about the Dallas subway plan. What comes to mind when we think of Dallas? Highways that connect sprawling landscapes of suburban development, or maybe a mountain of silver skyscrapers, ever increasing in their stark simplicity. It's not as surprising that, as a teenage American city, Dallas has not given up its affinity for shiny toys such as trains and planes, which would provide the illusion for success and importance. As a young city, compared to New York and San Francisco, Dallas has driven itself to evolve at a rapid pace to acquire the prestige of other American cities. The mass transit system that aimed to bring Dallas to the world-class forefront was known as the Dallas Area Rapid Transit. With DART, Dallas would be put on the map. Yes, with DART, Dallas would surely spring to life. Business would boom, people would flood downtown again, prosperity would overtake the epicenter of the city, and by that rationale, affect the suburban landscape. Everything seems so clear and obvious in the beginning, yet problems began to arise as planning for the new transit system progressed. We are accustomed to DART's existence at this point, but it's worth considering the long struggle of the DART board and those who represented the city of Dallas in formulating and refining those original plans. In short, countless hours were wasted as bureaucrats argued over the best, most feasible plan for our rail system. Some cities greeted the idea of public transportation readily, while other cities opposed the rail with aggression. Cities who agreed to be part of the DART initiative at times straddled the fence on many issues involving the plan's execution, making the process of building successful rail lines in Dallas a largely improbable vision, fueled by idealism yet constantly interrupted by bureaucratic hiccups. There was a division of philosophies within the local communities concerning DART and its dreams for Dallas's future. So what's wrong with DART? Some questions were, did Dallas need something more than buses to alleviate heavy traffic congestion? How would the agency go about raising money for this undertaking? Would the rails operate, and which lines would we build first? And how would Dallas allocate taxes to pay for this system? Do we as a city wish to acquire billions worth of debt to the federal government? No project of this magnitude had ever occurred in Dallas's history, despite some adamant opposition. Many DART board members and civic leaders had hoped for a bright future in Dallas's mass transit. After 2 years of planning, DART began officially on August 13, 1983, after 58% of the participating 14 cities voted yes to the proposal of the 147 miles of track. Projections for the cost were around $8.75 billion, with an approximate completion date of 2010. This sales tax would assist DART in paying off debt incurred for construction and manufacturing of the new tracks. The transit agency was governed by a board of 27 members, all of whom were selected by local government officials in both urban and suburban districts. The composition of DART board sought to ensure adequate representation of every city in the Dallas Metroplex, and they wanted a station to a rail line. Some greeted the idea of public transportation readily, while other communities continued to firmly oppose rail. Upon the creation of DART in 1983, it was still undecided what kind of trains DART would use, but the cost estimates were based off using light rail, which is a ground-level form of transit powered by overhead wires that can allow street traffic to cross the tracks. DART agreed that any cement decision or changes made by the committee would be voted by a two-thirds majority vote of the DART board favoring any plans for the project. Buses under the Dallas Transit Authority were the backbone of public transit, but starting in 1979, a push for a master plan evolved to expand public transportation into a rail system. DART began generating interest among the central business district to encourage the creation of a more unified method of transportation, connecting downtown with the fast-growing suburban populace. Rails would align with pre-existing railroad in order to avoid land grabs, and DART promised to avoid situations such as eminent domain in order to quell residents' fears of losing their neighborhood to the new system. DART's aim to appease all parties simultaneously proved a difficult task. There were many voices moving in various directions, particularly between downtown dwellers and the suburban sprawl. Quote, "We had to fight all the little cities. It was a very tough job," said Adeline Harrison, DART's first chairperson. There should have never been so many little cities involved with that legislation. How can you make a plan?" Expanding on Ms. Harrison's sentiments, the Dallas Morning News noted in an article, quote, "DART opponents are fighting a guerrilla war, with many separate neighborhood-based committees striking at the highly organized Establish Back DART campaign." The ongoing struggle of DART in the 80s was simply this: too many people presiding over the decision-making, and it proved impossible to appease everyone. Another large voice of opposition consisted of those who preferred the expansion of North Central Expressway. Dallas, with its landscape, seemed sensibly more accommodating to vehicular transport. Bill Severa, a former six-term Republican state representative, and David Fox, a Dallas County judge, both of whom worked in real estate, founded one of the most successful anti-DART groups called SMART, which stands for Sensible Metro Area Rapid Transit. SMART maintained the philosophy that light rail was nothing more than an outdated 19th century innovation that would be a waste of taxpayers' money. Severa called it a glossed-up version of an old streetcar. A longtime DART employee referred to SMART as, quote, "the alt-right," suggesting the organization's side of the political spectrum. He went on to add, quote, "There was a lot of big business that didn't want DART. It was too much of a change. It would bring those people downtown." By those people, it's indicative that Dallas has always had perception as transit as a blue-collar class system, when you consider how it's viewed in other places such as London or New York, where its use is omnipresent amongst all economic brackets. SMART would prove throughout the decade to be a real thorn in DART's side, and the lead organization, Citizen Group, and Bill Severa was a former broadcaster with the local CBS affiliate, and he utilized the media to shape the public view of mass transit in the most pejorative sense, and he was quite successful in some cases. Along with SMART, other anti-DART groups and a string of individuals emerged with a collective concern regarding how we would fund this multi-billion project. As of 1983, public transit in Dallas had always been through a private entity and never received federal funds. Some opponents saw the whole project as something that would benefit only a small sect of the populace, whilst other districts were slighted. Adeline Harrison, who prior working with DART had been Dallas's first female mayor, aptly characterized this as, quote, an unemotional debate, with board discussions lasting deep into the evening. The news media indeed played a key role in guiding the city's businesses and residents with a wide variety of perspectives of Dallas's press or lack of need for rail. Some members of the DART board thought it was more important to build quality at a greater expense rather than cheap, shoddy, and fast. To have a European-style rail system, in theory, was to write the success story of Dallas. In June of 1984, after almost a year of little ostensible progress concerning new railway, a group of 20 DART board members took a grand European trip to inspect the infrastructure of cultured cities. Mayor Stark Taylor called the controversial trip a, quote, bad decision, and said that the delegation of 4 to 5 members would have been sufficient. When they arrived back in Dallas, a majority of board members agreed that a downtown subway system would be the most quality form of transportation for the central business area. 1 year after DART began, people demanded to see evidence of their tax-paying dollars at work. Amidst this sense of urgency, a stalemate arose within the board whether to build a subway or continue with the less glamorous idea of the Main Street above-ground transit mall, which the mayor had earlier suggested. Councilman Lee Simpson summed it up this way, quote, "We need to build something fairly quickly, cheaply, without much controversy. A line that proves transit works." Though eager to get this project underway, every decision brought with it a maelstrom of sharp criticism. DART finally decided in '84 that light rail was the best way to go, but due to uncertain economic circumstances, the board remained undecided and the question of the downtown subway. By the summer of '85, the DART board had developed a proposal for a subway that would connect Mockingbird Lane and downtown with a couple of different routes to consider for the subway downtown. In June, a new director was appointed for the DART project after a year-long search. Ted Tedesco was hired, having gained expertise as a city manager in Boulder, Colorado, and San Jose, California. Stuart Scott was appointed as the new rail director. There was a sense of hope that new blood might revitalize DART despite contention on the subway issue. Tedesco optimistically expected to find resources necessary to pay for the system and encouraged the board to move forward without delay. And once again, the board debated a light rail underneath Central and the downtown subway. A large protest was organized for the day before the referendum the following August. Pictured here is a demonstrator called Dart Vader. Dallas City Councilman Jerry Bartos was indignant over DART's preliminary approval of his proposal. Quote, "What happened over the weekend with DART," he said, "is a brazen disregard for the integrity of the citizens of Dallas." Bartos emphasized that this expensive subway plan would drain all funds that should be allocated to suburban rail construction. Many in attendance on August 26 demanded fiscal responsibility and feasible expenditures. In other words, stick to cheap light rail that is faster to construct. The public's lack of confidence in DART's fiscal responsibility was fair considering the DART board's unnecessary lavish European getaway, a recent spike in bus fare, and criticisms of DART's decision that they were not running advertisements on their buses, which would obviously generate more revenue. DART countered the public's overall dismay with an argument that Dallas's underlying Austin chalk formations were ideal for underground tunneling. Engineer Tom Cusel noted, "It's so soft you can dig easily and hard enough that it holds itself up. The best of both worlds. We can build economic tunnels." Transit enthusiasts reminded those opposing the subway that buying land was much more expensive than digging underground. So many changes involving so much money left the public, the board, and the city feeling spent. In November, DART finally reversed its previous regulation against advertisements on buses, assuming this was an attempt to bring extra revenue. But another PR blunder occurred in 1986 when 8 wheelchair-bound protesters blocked downtown bus routes until they were all arrested. They were demonstrating because DART officials claimed making wheelchair lifts on buses would be too expensive and would not serve enough riders to justify the cost. In an attempt to cut costs, Tedesco's new service plan cut the original 147 miles of track down to 100 miles, while the agency remained bogged down with petty politics. People were not impressed by this serious deduction of mileage. All around 1986 was not the best year for DART. Similar to the city beautification movement, in early 1987, Dallas was allotted over $1 billion to revitalize urban aesthetics with a public arts master plan. To further implement DART's stagnant dreams of subways, a newspaper article offered a different approach to win support. The Dallas Morning News dared readers to imagine open spaces with street vendors, performing musicians, arts, and entertainment. The layers of artistic utilization of space would serve as a psychological indication to those experiencing the scene that Dallas had achieved cultural prestige. Boring infrastructure could become a work of art, or something that the taxpayers could enjoy in a sensory way as an attempt to assuage the skeptical public. An interest in downtown commerce remained a public concern. The subway downtown was proposed to run along either Elm or Pacific. Pacific would be less costly than Elm, but it would not take shoppers directly to downtown storefronts. The main lure to the swift transit downtown was to deliver instant gratification. Potential shoppers delivered straight into the stores, thereby stimulating economic commerce. Unfortunately, some engineers suggested that the building underneath 1967 One Main Place would be hazardous due to the amount of cement DART would have to drill underneath the building, possibly triggering avalanches. Pacific was the safest option. However, indecision, debate, and opposing visions continued to bog down the project. Award-winning city planner and architect James Pratt said, "Perceived convenience is terribly important to a retailer. In the end, despite the desire for convenience, the city opted for the most cost-effective decision, the Pacific Line." A curveball was thrown in DART's direction in the summer of '87 when the nonprofit Dallas County Historical Foundation raised concerns about a subway portal detrimentally impacting the John F. Kennedy assassination site. During this period of time, the former Texas Schoolbook Depository was in the process of becoming what is now known as the Sixth Floor Museum. Charles Anderson, the executive director of DART, promised that the agency would be sensitive to the historical importance of the plaza with regard to the subway. Quote, "We are trying to be good neighbors," he said when facing harsh criticism. At issue with a plan in which the subway trains would emerge from the ground right at the infamous grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza, a plan that also required demolition of a historic railroad switching tower in the parking lot of the Schoolbook Depository. After much debate, we faced the threat of losing lucrative federal funding. DART reluctantly altered its plans. A few months after the Kennedy crisis, it was revealed that due to DART's massive size of DART's public works project, an archaeological excavation was required for any proposed railway, including soil tests and historical assessments. Any tunnels downtown would infiltrate the oldest section of Dallas, not far from the original banks of the Trinity River. One can imagine the historic materials in that hallowed ground, perhaps dating back thousands of years. For the first time in North Texas history, the Antiquities Code of Texas was used to employ a project of this size. Rena Peterson wrote that possible cisterns underneath Elm Street could have been used by covered wagon firemen in Dallas's early days. She also reminded readers of the large possibility of finding Native American artifacts. This particular Dallas Morning News article created quite a buzz, generating curiosity of what lay beneath our downtown buildings. One of the only decisions Charles Anderson made as an executive director that left an indelible impression on Dallas was hiring James Pratt as a consultant to help analyze the best fit for proposed rail downtown. Pratt was an eccentric architect who had graduated from Harvard in 1953, but worked overseas and had an extensive affinity for all things European. Pratt epitomized the ability to make majestic art out of boring cement infrastructure. Not only did he have a knack for urban design and a genuine love for the city of Dallas, he had a razor-sharp attitude and a backbone necessary to instill a sense of vision, otherwise lost on committee members. Pratt said of the Pacific versus Elm debate, I quote, "I don't think it will be a totally simple solution, but given the fact that we're trying to make a wise investment that's going to be in use for 100 years, then you'd rather not have to come back and spend money on it later to correct mistakes." In the DART subway saga, Pratt is one rare gem who looked beyond the moment and considered the true historical significance of an undertaking. Pratt went on to work on the restoration of the Old Red Courthouse, another example of how active he remained in historic preservation while simultaneously creating modern spaces. At the end of '87, Charles Anderson and the board agreed that due to economic uncertainty, DART required federal funding. 3 different lines were suggested by board members to be the first one built. A series of influential businessmen such as Trammell Crow, John W. Carpenter, Norman Breaker joined forces to demand solid transportation plan, giving the project more steam with their support. But even with wealthy backers, DART still had plenty of opposition from anti-DART groups like SMART. In March of '88, SMART attacked the Dallas Morning News for not reporting objectively on the DART plan, and the ebb and flow of Dallas's popularity in the media never seemed to wane. A month after SMART's attack on the media attacked DART. The publishers of the Dallas Times-Herald vocally criticized the proposed Pacific line due to its proximity to their historic printing press. Arthur Weibel, publisher of the Herald, described the plan of running a subway near the printing press as a disaster waiting to happen, which caused yet another 2-week delay for the final subway decision. The bond election was finally set for June 25, 1988, and would aim to bring an ultimate conclusion to a near decade of bureaucratic red tape. Unfortunately, DART let itself falter when it needed to be at its best. Approaching the June bond election, opponents of DART noted the agency's lackadaisical approach in attempting to gain voters' support. The tone of the campaign was one of a strange nonchalance, almost as if victory was certain. Perhaps the agency had gotten ahead of itself and assumed its cause was more popular than it really was. DART's opponents were underestimated in their ability to win over constituents, and this would prove to be the beginning of the dissolution of the DART subway's dreams. A DART rail worker said at the time, "The problem is that DART is more interested in building a rail system than increasing mobility." He added that DART had never put the interest of the riders into concern. Its priorities are always rooted in superficial elements rather than logical common sense. The day before the bond election, Bill Severa from SMART wrote one final newspaper article urging voters to derail the DART subway plan for good. $86.6 million spent on research and development for the proposed 93 miles of rail. The roller coaster ride that began in August of 1983 came to an end when 58% of the voters defeated the subway plan. Suburban cities slowly began to secede themselves from the DART nation, all confidence drained along with bitter resentment and nothing to show for it. One wonders if DART had just pressed a little harder and worked more flexibly to endorse a single unified decision, perhaps we would be riding into a subway station underneath City Hall right now. But that was not meant to be, and the cost-effective above-ground light rail was established in its place. Yet DART's dreams of subway building have never really ended, as recent news demonstrates. In 1988, DART ultimately lost the referendum because they could not produce clear numbers to the city to indicate that they were fiscally responsible and of sound judgment with a well-conceived plan. Director Charles Anderson had a knack for not appointing well-trained engineers for positions best suited for technical expertise. 9 of the member cities representing the DART board withdrew, and it was suggested that the DART board be dissolved in its entirety and placed in the hands of Dallas County. Ridership was not at an all-time high, and bus fare was pricey, though a temporary reduction in bus fares could have attracted new riders. In order to appeal to a broader spectrum, DART also could have switched to a fuel-efficient alternative. DART's PR was further impacted when Adeline Harrison, who had treated the DART project like her baby from the beginning, threatened to bring an end to DART. Harrison said that DART was no longer serving its people and that she would not let her efforts and her fellow DART pioneers be debased by those in charge. Harrison was criticized by some for these statements, in part because of her obvious acceptance of the European getaway, an extensive boardroom makeover, and the divergence from the original plan to that of a subway. In these ways, critics argued Adeline Harrison set unhealthy precedents that led to DART's inevitable issues. At last, in October of '89, DART got approval for a plan of 20 miles of rail line and a street-level transit mall downtown. And from that moment on, DART drifted into what we know now today. Whatever awaits in DART's future, hopefully now with the passage of time, we can better appreciate those long days and nights, the bitter feuds and endless discussions that went into creating from chaos this viable network, which has helped connect our city for generations to come.